what makes Mahayana distinct from Hinayana, Theravada. The writings or the sutras that were written down about 500 years after the Buddha are not part of the Theravada scriptures. The perfection of wisdom literature as they became known, that culminate in the Lotus and the Heart Sutra, and later the Diamond Sutra, and even later than that the Pure Land Sutras and others, Flower Garden Sutras of Mahayana, were not part of the Pali Canon, the written down scriptures from the 2nd century BCE. And the ideal, the teaching is different. Teaching is now becoming a compassionate being, a bodhisattva, not on someone who is an arahat, a worthy one, a difficult journey, a 4-stage journey. You'll remember stream enterer, once returner, non-returner, and then worthy one. As you renounce everything and become a monk, spend your life meditating. No, the bodhisattva can be an ordinary person. The twin wings of karuna and prajna, compassion and wisdom, are emphasized in Mahayana, whereas wisdom is the big emphasis in Theravada. Faith in bodhisattvas is as important as the historical Buddha, and will help you towards enlightenment, if indeed we do get there. Mahayana Buddhism, there's an emphasis on skill in means, upya, skill in means. Well, this is a big difference from Theravada. In the Lotus Sutra, think of the burning house parable. The father is able to entice the kids out by lying to them. I've got sweets, I've got toys, come out and have them. Come out of your burning house. And then later on this gets worked out in the views of Nagarjuna and his school Madhyamaka, and Vibhansu and his brother and their school of thought Yogacara in the 3rd century. First 150 Madhyamaka, 3rd, 4th century Yogacara. And they go way further than Theravada in their philosophical treatment of reality and of Buddha nature. Everyone has a Buddha nature. All is Buddha, the Buddhaverse or Buddha reality. We'll look to it in later lessons. Now you might pause now and read a bit of Denise Cush's chapter on Mahayana. You might write down your own explanation of Mahayana authorship, canonization of not Theravada but Mahayana sutras, the perfection of wisdom literature. You might create a mind map of the main characteristics of Mahayana. You might note and think, as Cush says, there was not that much animosity between the two wings of Buddhism. There has been tolerance of diversity to a degree, and in the heyday of Buddhism in India, Mahayana and non-Mahayana monks lived in the same monasteries. Well, is she right? Is she being romantic? What about the councils, the constant need to exclude, to anathemize, as it were? I wonder, is she right? Pick up the video when you've maybe had a little bit of a go at this. Another way of thinking about Mahayana and its difference to Theravada is the 3 refuges. All Buddhists believe in the 3 refuges, but the refuges are understood differently. In Mahayana, the Buddha is a much enlarged idea, not just a historical idea in Theravada, a more metaphysical, a cosmological conception. Everything in the end is Buddha. The heavenly realms are an emanation of Buddha. The realm that we live in is an emanation of Buddha. All is Buddha. Much bigger idea. The Buddha's teaching, the Dharma, includes extra ideas that Theravada would reject. The doctrine of sunyata, or emptiness. The ideas of the Trikaya doctrine, the idea of Buddha nature. The Sangha. Well, monasticism is still supported, but it's less emphasized. The Bodhisattva, ideal for all of us to be compassionate. It supports the laity much more. So, create your own little mind map. Now, a little bit of extended knowledge now. You need to know about, the exam board says, the 2nd century BC up to the 1st century AD. Well, what leads to the 4th council is the key question. The 3rd council ends about the 2nd century BCE, and this is the council where the Abhidhamma is added to the Pali Canon. Remember, this is the section that wasn't written by the Buddha, but was written by Buddhist monks in Sri Lanka. It refutes heretical false teachings like the Nicene Creed of Augustine in the 3rd century. For Christians, rejected the false doctrines it's claimed that Arianists and the Docetics and others taught. So this Abhidhamma in particular section, this 3rd section of the Pali Canon, is the product of this 3rd council. And not everybody's happy. And this leads to a 4th council, which happens at the end about 100 BCE. So, where Theravadins or proto-Theravadins meet in Sri Lanka to write down this aspect of the Pali Canon, and it emphasizes how it rejects early, you might say, Mahayana ideas. On the other hand, Mahayana or Proto-Mahayana have their own council, not in Sri Lanka, but in northern India, in Kashmir. And this the group that became Mahayana, the Sarvasivadin, who had been rejected by the 3rd council, and another school, the Dharma Guptaka school, all of which was influenced in this northwest of India as part of the Kushan Empire. Well, it got royal patronage. Here we see the emergence of different groups through patronage. He gathered, this king of the northwest gathered 500 monks, and he wanted a great exegesis, a Mahavibhashana. It's in effect a Mahayana Abhidharma, or a proto-Mahayana Abhidharma, Sarvasivadin Abhidharma. So we have these clashing schools, clashing councils, a divided Sangha, and the rise of polemics. The word polemics means argument, political or religious argument, rebuttal and refutation. So you have the original 1st council. 100 years later, you have the 2nd council. From these councils, what breaks out is the 2 groups, the Mahasamgika, which is the main breakaway group, which you may say is Proto-Mahayana. The Way of the Elder group continues. They have a 3rd council, 247. And even within that, there are breakaway groups. But then you have the Theravada group, that kind of begins to emerge and ratifies strict forms of Theravada-esque kind of knowledge. And the Abhidhamma eventually gets written down, and this pushes out the Mahasamgika group. And eventually that will lead to Theravada. Well, there are all these other schools that begin to emerge. Meanwhile, our Proto-Mahayana group has all these different groups that develop within it. And some of the key groups follow Mahasamgika, but they take ideas from across the schools of Buddhism that are around in Sri Lanka and India at the time. So again, these clashing councils continue. What emerges in the 2nd century? Well, following Ashvaghosha, we have the Madhyamaka school in the 2nd century. In the 3rd and 4th century, the Yogacara school, and then the emergence of Tibetan Buddhism and the emergence of Pure Land Buddhism. All of these can be traced to not Oriental but Indian origins. Madhyamaka is started by Nagarjuna. Vishabandhu starts Yogacara. Then Mahayana develops in China and Japan and carries on. Out of Madhyamaka in particular comes Vajrayana, although it has earlier proponents of it as well. And there's an influence of Yogacara, as it were, also on Vajrayana. Pure Land develops with various true Pure Land and ordinary Pure Land versions. And then we get the development of Chan or Zen Buddhism in China and later in Japan, and the development of Huyan or flower garden, and in Japan, Nichiren Buddhism. So here's some of the complexity of Mahayana, how it develops. Visually, the spread of Buddhism starts like this. Theravada, you would say, is southern Buddhism. It spreads from Sri Lanka to Myanmar, formerly Burma, Thailand, Indonesia. So Mahayana spreads north to China, Japan, Taiwan, and actually then back to Vietnam. You get this sort of overlap in Vietnam of southern and northern Buddhism. Vajrayana develops thirdly in Tibet and then in Mongolia. And these are their, I call them spheres of influence. Now, fascinatingly, Buddhism ceases to exist almost entirely in India, its homeland, by about the year 1000 AD. Why is that? Some think it was the practice of puja that the people never gave up, the home worship of Hindus that kept the home fires burning for Hinduism, as it were. So one of the key ideas is the different ideas of the Buddha. Mahayana has this more metaphysical and cosmological conception. There are many Buddhas, not just the historical Buddha, Buddhas that predate the Buddha and Buddhas that came after him. There is a future Buddha called Maitreya. And And you find stories of these, and